It's true. We are all matching. Hey, welcome to the 2-month review, the weekly podcast brought to you by Open Letter 3% and our loving patrons. This is a podcast where we take a book, or in this case, two, break them down bit by bit, section by section, talk about them, analyze them, so on and so forth. It's a little heavy today, given the events at the Robb Elementary School in Uvalde, Texas, but we are here to at least talk about DML Eltit's Never Did the Fire and Danny Hahn's Catching Fire. And, you know, even if it's an hour of like somewhat distraction, that's not the worst. The world is a bad place. And we do send all of our thoughts, prayers, everything to everyone who is impacted by this event. And it is horrible, and fuck the NRA. Kate, what do you think?
What? I thought, I agree.
How old are your kids, Katie?
My kids are 5 and 8. Well, almost 8. 7.
5 and 8. Mine's 7. It was so. What, your 8-year-old's in second grade?
My oldest is in second grade. Yep. Yep. Yeah.
So
I haven't finished the reading. I was supposed to finish reading today. I was supposed to finish it yesterday, and I can say something good about yesterday and about this morning. And then I learned the news, and I just have been like unable to really finish stuff. So, but I did want to mention that yesterday I had the absolute pleasure of meeting up with Valerie Miles of many, wonderful translation fame, and also Granta en Español. And two of the writers that were featured in this last, 25 best young Spanish novelists came yesterday to Valencia to do a talk. And it was really great. It was David Aliaga, who's from Spain, and Eudres, and it's the last name, Planchon. Planche. I have to look, who's from Cuba and living in Madrid, and just delightful. And their conversation was great. And so I did that yesterday instead of reading. Incidentally, David Aliaga, his section for Granta en Español was translated by Danny Hahn. So Danny Hahn translated him. And Margaret Jewel Costa translated Eudris's piece. So it was really cool. Like I had to be a plant in the audience and like make sure I had like a question prepared,
Nice.
Nobody asked anything. And so my question was about their experience of being translated and like what that was like, and anything they could speak to. And they had some like great, even like little stories about, word choice and going back and forth with the translator and working with them. And I mean, I'm imagining like coming from Cuba, like getting like picked for Granta. And that they tell you, like, well, here, like, Javier Marias and Jose Saramago's translator is going to translate your short story. It's really cool, So, and Valerie is wonderful and is always, has her hands in a bunch of cool projects. So that was very energizing, I can say, like, from the translation world. Good stuff's happening there.
How did you like some of the, I guess, like, my first introduction was that one issue, I think it was in 2010, maybe, that had, Carlos LaVey was in that one, Samantha Schweblin.
Newman, Andres Newman.
And I think there's some fantastic writers that gone to some great things.
Paula was in there too.
Yeah, Paula was in that. What do you think of this
selection? Yeah, I mean, so it's been like almost exactly a year that it's been out, and it's going to be super interesting to see where everything ends up, like in 10 years, like we're able to do with the other edition. There are some of the authors are already, I mean, like Irene Sola, she was translated by Mara Faye Latham for Granta and for Granta Press, and in the US it came out with Grey Wolf. And I know that Andrea Arbejo is coming out. I think that was a Julia Sanchez translation. So, and I mean, I don't have the whole list in front of me, but there are quite a few that I think will be published, and then it'll be interesting to see what happens and where they all are in 10 years. Some of the things that they were saying that the authors were talking about last night that I really liked, they talked about how wonderful it was to read each other,
Nice.
and how to come across works that they would have never ever necessarily gotten their hands on otherwise. People writing, in their age group and from very, very different perspectives, like not just culturally, of course they're all writing in the Spanish language, but from very different places and very different Spanishes. But also just, like stylistically, obviously thematically, but how, like, what a discovery it was for them to read each other. And I guess some of them, like, they've created groups like where they read each other's work, like their works in progress right now. Like several of them are working on novels, and they send each other pages, and they support each other that way. And one thing that Yudris said yesterday was that he said, so it was something to the effect of, there's always like polemic around, and this is perfect to talk about now too, because like we've got the Booker announcement coming and all this stuff, but there's always going to be, whenever something has to be like picked, there's going to be dissension, there's going to be judgment, there's going to be righteous anger, and there'll be agreement sometimes too. But that what Yudris was saying was that, like, in terms, like, it might, whatever you read, like what you read might not be what you are looking for. It might not be part of like your search as an intellectual or as a reader, but to be able to read people from a place of like appreciation for what they're doing, even if you don't like it, is really important. And I love that, because Chad and I have talked a lot about this recently. It's just in terms of like, as how difficult it is in the current climate with certain types of readers to say, like, to read things that you don't like, and to still see value in reading them, for example, or in, reading stories that like, where you don't find yourself like reflected.
Yeah.
And to be able to say like, well, this is still a worthy exercise, have to read it and write it. I'm glad they did it, even if it's not what I am looking for. And I loved that. I loved what he said about that. So it was like really good vibes. It was really positive. Like, it wasn't, that was the point. Yeah, the point was that, like, to the outside world, I think, and maybe in terms of people who weren't selected, there was like this feeling that it was like this, like, either like elitist or competitive type situation. But within the group, their experience is not of competition at all, but like a real sort of, I think, warmth of reception amongst each other, which was
Great.
Cool. So yeah, it was good vibes. Good vibes.
To continue on good vibes thing, we should also give a shout out to former TMR guest and focal point, Frank Wynn, who yesterday was the recipient of the Dublin Literature Award for his translation of The Art of Losing by Alice Zeniter.
All right.
Yeah.
So congrats.
Great.
That's a 25,000 euro prize.
Yep. Yeah. So that's one of the awards that split.
Cigarettes with that.
You get some good wine. I have a story about it. What you were going to say, Katie, is that it's one of the awards where if the book is translated and it wins, the award money is split. It's 75-25 rather than 50-50, but like, we'll let that go for a second. At one point in time, who's that author that Juan Gabriel Vasquez, he and Andres Newman were finalists, and they made a bet that if one of them won, then the other one could pick out a bottle of wine. Then they would go a special bottle of wine, and they would celebrate with that special bottle of wine. The one who won would purchase it, right? Like whatever they wanted, no limits. And so Gabriel Vasquez won, and Andres is going to see him, to visit him. And so he went and researched and found a bottle of French wine that was like exactly like 75,000 euros, and would like just send it to him blind. It was like, this is what I want. And showed up at his house with like wine glasses. And he was like, I'm sorry, I just couldn't really. And he's like, I'm just fucking with you. I wasn't expecting you to buy a 75,000 euro bottle of wine. But it was like a pretty good wine.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Wait, so who won it? Wait, so who was the winner in that case?
Juan Gabriel Vasquez.
He won. Okay.
Won. Yeah. For then in
The Informants. Or The
Maybe?
Informers.
One of the two. I'm not a fan of his, so all of his books are out of my mind. I can see great things in them. I just don't. They don't speak to me. If you know what I'm saying.
Yeah, it's not part of your search.
It's not that they're bad. They're just not for me. To tie up to banter a little bit more, just so you guys know, the latest Latvia update is that there's a festival, book festival, poetry festival, festival of literature happening starting tonight, and I am to go after this to the opening event, which is a poetry reading followed by an interpretive Latvian dance set to the music of Kate Bush.
Oh.
Woo! This is gonna be awesome.
I'm gonna send you my thoughts and prayers, Chad.
I think there's gonna be. I want to know the ratio of shaven to unshaven armpits.
I will let you know. This will be an update for next week.
In the interpretive dance to Kate Bush. That's what
Hey,
in Latvia.
I gotta say, like, Kate Bush, that's my girl, man. I like Kate Bush.
I know. I like Kate Bush too.
I love Kate Bush. That part's awesome.
I mean, but I'm saying the interpretive dance.
Yeah, no, I know. I don't know about the interpretive dance and the poetry reading, but I'll go for it just to hear Kate Bush.
I know. It's like it could be way worse.
One of the things that, let's put the brakes on for just 1 second here. Is that so far my experience with music in Latvia has been that every song that you know is covered poorly, and that's played on the radio. So there's a male version of Toxic by Britney Spears that I've heard several times, sung by a dude. There's like, everything is like it's like just off, and it's never quite right. And you hear it and you're like, hey, that sounds like a familiar. No, it does not. That is a new version of something. There's a particular beer garden right downtown that I have to pass by a lot that blares music, and it's all of that. It's all fake covers of songs, and it's unbelievable. So with all that behind us, and with a short episode this week, we should get into Never Did the Fire. And I know, Katie, you said you didn't finish it, but do you? I was gonna say I could recap it, but here's what happens: people sit in bed, they eat bread, they sit in bed. They remember that they used to be part of a cell.
Tea.
They
drink tea.
Well, yeah, there's a big emphasis on the eye and seeing and perspective, and then corporeal decay.
Have you ever gone to one of your loved ones and held their eye open and just touched it? Just touched their eye directly?
No.
Yeah, who hasn't?
You're not revolutionary at all.
So
sometimes Kaya wakes up and I'm just hovering, just like touching the aqueous surface of the eye.
It was hard not to imagine the scene in Clockwork Orange.
I know.
The eye forced open. I couldn't help but like imagine that as I'm reading that for some reason.
The first time I watched Clockwork Orange was when I got my wisdom teeth pulled, and I was doped the fuck out, and I watched that movie and was like, this isn't real. This is a hallucination.
So can we talk about the eye? Brian, you brought it up.
Yeah, let's talk about the eye.
Right. So our section opens with the eye, right? We think obsessively about eyes.
Yep.
Mine, yours, our eyes. We look over the human atlas, the most compact kind. But in reality, our attention is focused on the disintegration of its parts. The excessive and cunning amplification of each organ, and there, of course, that enormous eye with its intricate relationships. So what the fuck are they talking? What is she talking about? Is this the cell?
I've also been watching Doom Patrol, and there's a sequence in which there's a giant eye in the sky that's disintegrating everything. So I have another version of what this could be. But I was thinking about the eye as being like much broader, like panopticon style, like the surveillance things, and like that being connected to everything. But I don't. Now that you read that, I'm like, I don't know, man.
We think obsessively.
To happen about 400 times.
But we think obsessively about eyes. Mine, yours, our eyes. We look over the human atlas, the most compact kind.
The most compact kind of atlas?
I guess. The human atlas is the most compact atlas. I don't really know what that means, I have to admit. But I wonder if our attention is focused on the disintegration of its parts. I thought maybe this is again like referencing the coming apart of the cell or the weakness or the fracturing of the cell, possibly. That's what I was wondering. But yeah, so what else do we learn? So, I mean, I think we need to talk, obviously, maybe about style or about like, you know, how this is being told. But I'm also curious, like, how are we being moved forward and how in this section?
So that's the thing that I'm most fascinated with. This ties into, and you are aware of this because you edited the book, but I just finished proofing this book about Editions de Minuit by Stephen Spalding. I think is his last Spalding.
Spalding.
That's coming out from Delkey Archives Scholarly Series. And it's a history of like Jerome Linden, who was the second person in charge of Minuit and founded like the Nouveau Roman with Robbe-Grillet, indoctrinated, brought Beckett into that tribe, Boutour, Pinget, all those, Nathalie Seurat, who's one of my favorites, all those kind of things. And in reading about it and getting reinvigorated into the ideas of the Nouveau Roman and how they structure their ideas and philosophy of writing, which look down upon plot and look down upon like characterization and look down upon the bourgeoisie aspects of writing, and instead said things need to be objective and outside and clarified in that way, and that the process of the writing, the adventure of the writing, of the creation of what you're seeing is more exciting than a plot. And so I was thinking a lot in reading this section as to how their plots materialize and move forward and how this one does. And I see certain parallels. I wouldn't say that this is like an example of the Nouveau Roman necessarily, but I do know that like Robbe-Grillet said that his writing was most influenced by Juan Jose Sayer, the Argentine writer who we published, and he has some similarities with Diamela Eltit. So it's not like, you know, there doesn't have to be a group for things to have influences and to be occurring in other parts of global literature. So I think there's a bit of that where it continually sticks with like describing the eye, describing the touching the eye, describing that room, staying in the bed, the thing about the legs, everything's like these little individual almost atomistic components. And then what the plot isn't being like spelled out, because that's the less important thing. It's coming about some other way. And I'd like to pay attention to how that happens in the second half of this book in particular. But so far, the thing that I would say we knew pretty early on that, assuming this is a male and a female, that the female who is narrating did something at one of the cell meetings that caused the fracture that led to the disintegration of the cell. That brings up again here in a way where she says like, well, you wanted me to do this, that I had to like object to you in order for you to consolidate your power. And so there was like, and I'm always confused by whether when she says like the first cell we joined is like the only cell, or if it's like a multitude of revolutionary cells that they've been part of. And I think that ambiguity is intentional, which is also a Nouveau Roman sort of trick. But I think that the plots come out slowly but surely with the idea of I think you said this, but the baby who died, that there's a he that they did not take to the hospital because if they had been seen again, surveilled, witnessed, that would be horrible for them and for the cell and for everything. And so they do not take this, I believe, child to the hospital, who then dies. And that there is a sense of trauma that's sort of at the core of this. And that slowly but surely it's like unpacking the I'm going to say some crazy shit here, unpacking the physicality of the trauma through like the various, like a focus on eating, the focus on the sight, the focus on her legs, the focus on different portions of things, as being all broken down.
I have to move. The neighbor on the other side of the wall is drilling into the wall right in front of me. So I'm just gonna move.
I have like just the worst lighting ever, so I look awful. Our ratings are going way down here.
Really? We're
No.
just watching people. We're just watching people leave.
People are like,
So
figure this shit out, Chad.
okay, so what I think is really interesting about about the way that you just summarized my the reading of the book that I gave to you, Chad, earlier today. Your summary of
Cheating.
oh my god! It's like the drilling. I can't get away from it. Can you guys hear it?
Very lightly.
Well, I'll try not to be distracted. So I think, yeah. So we see there's the thought about like the death of the child, And then also like, we're learning more about like their roles in the organization. So like, we know that the you that's being addressed was the secretary, and that the narrator, right, that they had some sort of dynamic in which like his position depended in some degree to some degree on her, like both coordinating with him and like opposing him in a way, right? And so yeah, like that to me, like here's an example on page 51, in the middle of that middle paragraph. Years later, when the unknowns between us had all been toppled, I understood that I'd acted as a part of you, that it was you who had pushed me in some mysterious way to create the disturbance you so needed to validate your precision. And it's just, so now someone's knocking. Sorry, guys. It was like, casa tomada. Someone's like in my space. So yeah, I think that's a way that we're being advanced in plot. And I am really interested to see like where that goes, like how we, what is like either the final betrayal or like, I am sure we'll learn what happens with the child, but the way that's being told is it's like, it feels like it's a step forward and then steps back. It's like these tiny movements and a lot of repetition. So, and it's hard to read through the repetition. Honestly, like I, again, can like appreciate what's being done, but I'm not like captivated. I feel like sometimes I'm like, maybe I already read this sentence, but it's that same, but I haven't. And it's that same idea of like this return. And that's where I really think about the trauma coming through and about this way of like narrativizing trauma. And how would you do that? It's like in these fragments and in the repetition, and it's the repetition of like their actions as well. So you mentioned like the physicality of like the eating and things. And it's like, we're looking at like just a very, very restricted and distilled life where like the basics can be completed and like nothing else. And that it's that, but the conversation keeps cycling back. Like her mind keeps going back to the same things and tell me, and like, I don't remember, or, and then, he, and him saying just like, quiet. So, so I think that is interesting. Sorry.
This part on 47, you insisted we've got to clear out any sentimentality because otherwise our cell will be transformed into a stronghold that's too volatile. I did your perspective.
I have a related question. So when you're saying that things advance in this sort of way, so one of the other things that advances that I marked is on 48, right in between the two that you guys just read, where she's the secretary, and then she says, I vaguely made a mistake, which is a weird phrasing to begin with. I vaguely made a mistake. And then later on, it's like dead middle of the page. Suddenly they started to lose their purpose or simply distance themselves from my hand. I left out a word which subverted the sentence. That word broke the order of time, the verb that governed the letter's most intense trajectory. It just happened. Then it was too late. My copy, careless and imperfect, spun wildly around, changing the syllogism's meaning. I was ashamed, doubly so. And I'm curious what you two made of that, because the only other thing that comes up related to that is on page 47, she repeats this phrase, all property relations in the past have continually been subject to historical change consequent upon the change in historical conditions. And I wasn't sure if this thing that she miswrote or left out a word from is related to that, or if these two are separate things, but also like, what is that like part of this breaking up of the cell? Is it just another telling of the possible ways in which the cell like devolves, or like, what is that? I also, I vaguely made a mistake is a really curious phrase to me. I think I'm going to say that from now on. Every time I fuck up, I'm just gonna be like, I vaguely made a mistake. Like, no, you like legitimately did a wrong. I don't know, vaguely mistake.
I go with the Charles Baxter phrasing, mistakes were made.
That's also a what's his name? Joseph Avicii book is called Mistakes Were Made, about like two couples that have an affair. It's fucking great. That guy's great too. He would be an interesting author for you to read, Brian. I think you'd really like him.
No, because I did find it interesting because the thematic elements are this idea of like the eye, what kind of, and then like she plays with vision and what kind of vision is there for the cell, the idea of a grassroots effort. And then it's all about disintegration, degradation, going off course, like mistakes were made, right?
And also,
something, it goes off course somehow, and it's falling apart, it's decaying, it's crumbling, and this,
which is contrasted with her vaguely making a mistake, and like the grassroots thing always is kind of sprawling, and there's a sense of that sort of disintegration, like you say, contrasted with that she said whatever she said so that he could make sure that he had his precision, that his viewpoint is from the sentence you read, Katie. I had remembered it as position, but it's precision, which is slightly different, and like a weird counter to like things that are sort of falling apart.
Yeah, it's interesting because I feel like the way that it has sort of like either constructing her identity as she tells the story, the narrator, and throughout her life in relationship to this man, is that she's the one who sort of is like escapes the borders, right? Like she's the one who wants to eat and is like, and will drink the milk and like,
have cheese,
and it like
crazy.
The body, she's ready to eat. She doesn't have to be so militant with the rice or whatever. And the way that she describes it is like, it like disgusted, he didn't want her to watch him swallow and he didn't want to see her eating. And now it's like, there's this thing right here. Yeah. So on page 49, well, also she's the only one who now goes outside.
Yeah.
So again, like there's this part of her that is like, seems like a less controlled figure in opposition or like in contrast to this like very, very controlled other person that she's with. And so on page 49, where was this? Shoot, I just lost it. Oh yeah, here we go. Well, she says, so she says that like as she's doing the copying, right? Because she wanted to have this position, less submissive. And I mean, that's really interesting. She wanted to have like a less submissive position and like gets to be the copyist. It's like, like the ladies can go work in the office, but like you're gonna have to be,
right,
a secretary, right? It makes me think of Mad Men. But when she says like, so they had a certain aptitude, right? She was like selected for this job because of the aptitude. Certain aptitudes that allowed us to come together, except on the day when tedium must have assailed me and I abruptly broke the regulations. And again, so like there's this sense of her not being disciplined in the same way that others are disciplined. And perhaps acting more like naturally in that sense. And so I do think there's like it seems to me anyway that like there's a dichotomy being set up in this dynamic.
With this sort of dichotomy too, that this is trite to say and whatnot, but like there is sort of the dichotomy that's coming up here too of like the female as natural and as like acting and organic and the male as cerebral and stoic and aesthetic and like confined, precise. All those things are kind of popping up here too. And that's interesting. Like when you go back then to like the human atlas, whatever that might mean, but of the body, like the precision of the body and the precision of the eye is like a really remarkable thing. And she references a few times of like, well, no, this signals to your optic nerve or whatever. But like for us to see is like a really intricate, specific sort of working. And like, if you think of the cell as like a body that is going to be a revolutionary spirit, that will become a model for a different sort of society, one that doesn't include AK-47s or whatever the fuck and like other things, and is not so awful. The precision of it is sort of important in terms of like how it functions together. And then also has that tie of like, if it's too much in that way, it's too restricted, too much bread, too much rice that you choke on, and not enough like organic feeling. And then you end up with a dying child. Is this the plot of this book?
And I think you titled what did you title the episode?
Something horrible. Because I was looking for the most horrible line.
Was it something about?
It is the death machine exterminating. Well, it's the.
Oh yeah, the death machine.
Death machine. The
Okay,
whole line
'cause-
is like death machine exterminating the cell machine.
Okay, because on page 54, something I have highlighted that I thought was really interesting is, if you will permit me to read it, he's dying, I thought. We thought it together, said it together, he is dying. I saw, or we saw, I no longer knew how to be fair, the fragility of the human machine, or else we observed the human as a contemptible organization, common and mechanical, a primitive and unceasing form, generating the worst type of exploitation, a merely organic production that was there only to serve its own species, the human species. Yes, a serial, mass-produced machinery that existed to colonize itself, the human species, we say, in a process that isn't even complex, but exploitative in what it is hiding. I mean, that's a really pretty cool indictment, actually. I think this is one of my favorite.
Same. You know what it
Lines.
reminds me of? It reminds me a bit of like Deleuze and Guattari, who I probably am mispronouncing both of their names, and that's fine. But their anti-Oedipal book has a lot of that sort of same language of like the desiring machine and the like that sort of creation through capitalism and through political situations and like the way in which politics and government control bodies in particular. But like there is like that creation of desire and of like a mechanistic sense of being human, which is preferable to like a capitalist corrupt society, is that you do what you're supposed to do according to these rules. It's why like algorithms are scary to a lot of people, because they are like, know what you're supposed to do and you generally just do that and you can just feed them. And it's also terrifying from the point of view of the person, where you don't have an organic vibe. You are just like a statistic in a larger sea of statistics. Ooh, shit. Been reading too many existential things right now. I'm out. Should we? I know we don't have a ton of time. I don't know if you have anything else to say about this right now, but do you guys want to talk about Danny's book as well? Or if there's anything else you want to add to this? I'm still...
There's a
feel
lot.
like I'm always, every chapter, I feel like I'm finding my way as to what this is supposed to be. And I feel like one thing that you said, Katie, that I'll steal again, is that you feel like you could just read it through. And at some points I had the sense of like, if I just read this through once and then gone back and was reading it now, it would be there. I would have a better footing. Like, I'm not sure where my footing is at any point in time. And like, I mean, except that they're in bed and they're revolutionaries that fail, and that's about it. And Franco's dead. And like, you know, a lot of like the footing is missing. And there's something that Danny says about that, where he's like, the first draft I get through because the second time I can enjoy, like when you walk through a city, the first time you just try to get where you're going, and the second time you notice all the buildings along the way. Essentially that might even be the quote.
Yeah, the 3rd of March. I remember my friend Nick describing multiple readings of the same book by comparison to the experience of being in a new town and walking the same route several times over. The first time, you're sort of focusing on, how do I get there? But once you know how you get there, you start being able to focus on the lovely little details along the way. Once you know your route, you don't have to worry about, is this where I turn left? You can take in the view.
Yep.
Yeah, I love that, and kind of like similar but different. On page 66, when he's talking about just the desire to have the first draft be over, I really love this section. And I feel this way
about this.
Oh, really? And I love that. I love this sentiment. I think this is really interesting. But I also feel that way a little bit oftentimes about my own readings. Like sometimes I do just want to have like a first quick reading of something and then go back and read the finer points and pick it apart. Like that's why for me, actually, like last season when we did 2666, I really enjoyed it because I had already read it, more than once. And I loved going back and being able to tease things out instead of sort of feeling like every time I come on here, as I'm like discovering this book, I feel like I don't have it figured out. And it's harder for me to talk about things that way. But let me just read this little, look at, go ahead, Shad. No? Me? I just want to read this one little bit real quick about the quarry. So this is on 66 at the bottom. So I really want the first draft to be over. Then I can start the detailed work of molding it into something that I hope will be just as mesmerizing in English as the Spanish is proving to be. At the moment, I'm just hacking bits of rock that are very approximately the right size out of the quarry, and no one ever became a sculptor in order to do that bit. All the real artistry of shaping it is yet to come, and for me, the finer the work and the closer it gets to being tinkered into finished form, well, the happier I am working on it. And I think that's really cool. I love that the first draft is just like bits that are approximately the right size. It's so true. It's so true.
I think the thing I was going to say ties in and builds off of that is that the fun part, like I understand what you're saying about 2666 and about the having read, like, and we've done most of these books that we've done, I've read at some point in time with the exception of like Ardor and a couple others. But I do like the process of not having had read this where like the reading process becomes the podcast. Like how does one struggle to understand? It's sort of like a nouveau roman, to stick with my favorite thing of the moment, sort of bit of like, how do you create? How do you learn? How do you reckon with this? How do you make sense out of something? And how do you try and build it into something that's larger? Like, it's sort of like the cheat of professors, where, not to shit on academia too much, but like, is that when they teach the same book a million times, it's not that exciting to hear it being explained. As someone who's already had it all processed, it feels too packaged to me. And I like the organic nature of this, to put it against the precision of that, of like trying, like you struggling through and putting things together, figuring things out, is actually exciting to witness, I think. And it's something that isn't usually what is highlighted in our literary culture.
No, like, we should have the answers. Like, I can just, I can say that it will haunt me to the end of my days that in like the second episode, I didn't know if it was a male or a female, the narrator. And I was like, well, maybe these are cues. Like, maybe I've like uncovered some clues to, the identity. And it's like, I'm like, oh, what a dum-dum. Like, it's just funny though. It's funny what we expect of ourselves, I think, as sort of like that we should have a better grip on our reading. Because we often present our opinions like pretty fully baked, right? Yeah. Like, people throw stuff out there, but they don't usually do it thinking they might be wrong.
they don't usually do it just live on YouTube either. That's actually the thing I found through the process of the 17 seasons we've done this, is that I actually feel like the first time I read this book is when I talk to you, Brian, and you, Katie, in this instance, is the first time I'm actually reading it, because I don't explain it. I don't read anything until I try and explain it. Up until then, it's like being put into a repository. But until I try and articulate what it is, it doesn't feel like I'm actively engaging with it in the same way, unless I have to write about it or do something like there's a production aspect. This is like a maybe kind of old school, also trite sort of thing to say, but of like the Cortázar Calvino sort of line of like the reader is an active reader. There is no text without the reader's response to it sort of vibe. And I feel like this emphasizes that for me and brings out like the reading process. And I feel better about teaching the books in my classes that I haven't read because of this practice, where I'm like, oh, I can just like go in there and like learn as I talk what this actually is, instead of like needing to know things, because I'm never going to know things.
So can we talk about, well, actually, I want to talk about imposter syndrome, because I think that's great. Kind of interesting. But I actually think it'd be more interesting to talk about this part where with the title, and about how like Twitter sourced the title as like a Cesar Vallejo poem. And I think this is cool how this came to be, if anyone
agreed
is interested in picking up on that.
GMS El Fuego Nunca.
We can end on that.
Mother tongue.
You sound like me pronouncing every Latvian word I see written on the sign.
Juego su rol de frio muerto.
Oh my God.
Is that close or not on the ballpark? Okay.
It's not, I mean, it is close, sure.
Yeah.
I'm just, I support anyone trying to speak another language, so sure. But it's cool, like this paragraph. So on 71, as it was pointed out on Twitter, from @Ciellos Vieron, pointed out on Twitter that when I started the diary, the title is a line from a Estar Vallejo poem. And so in theory, everything fortunately is still a normal theory at this point. The title should be translated in such a way that it could be made to work within that same context, as if extracted from an English translation of the Vallejo poem. And so this is interesting. Like, sure, I could find an existing translation of the Vallejo poem and pull the line out of that, which is what I assumed had happened.
Same.
I assumed when I saw that that's where the title came from in the epigraph, I thought, oh, well, how fortunate, that once you figured that out, you couldn't just find the poem. And that's pretty interesting.
I'm trying to find, I'm right now trying to find the actual, if there is another translation of the poem, to see if there is another variation on this, but it's not coming up immediately. If anyone listening, I can't see your comments because I'm using my iPad, but if you're listening, please email us if you know of the translation, another translation of this poem, because I'd be curious to see what it is.
Yeah, so in the novel, it's never did the fire ever play its part better as the dead cold.
Mm-hmm.
And we have the 4 that you just quickly Google search that kind of in the ballpark, but not. He even says they're mostly not good.
Yeah.
I think that part is fascinating.
Yeah.
As well. That's the one I had marked to talk about in relation to this too, is the thought process of why it doesn't work and what the emphasis needs to be on the second never and where that comes, and the fact that it comes in the epigraph and not in the title is an interesting fits. I feel like it fits the book where there's these component parts that reflect one another but don't necessarily aren't always aligned. So we get the title Never Did the Fire, but the real title is actually a little bit more. It's Never Did the Fire play its part better than the dead cold. Never did it ever do that. The ever is left off of the title, but it's in the poem in that line.
Right.
So you know what I mean? That additional part to it, that remainder, that aspect. The one I wanted to ask you about, Katie, I know that you have the largest time constraint, so we can end on this, is this is something that I've seen in 1,000,000,001 translations, and I wondered if you would speak about it for a second of the struggle of the article of the.
Yes, I'd love to. Is that included in the diary? Because I did not finish the reading for today, Professor Post.
It was.
So no, I'm on the
It is the very first thing that we read on February 12th.
I like the chips.
That is funny. That's really funny. Okay, hold on. February 12th. Okay. No, Chad, I'm not prepared to speak on this.
Let's open next.
Never mind then.
Can we open with it next week? Yeah, thank you.
The next episode.
One thing on the next episode, one thing I will say that's interesting and that I do struggle with, or that I'm working on now with this Juan Gomez Barcena book, is, where everything is, we often don't use. Oh, Chad's gone. I think he's out.
Yeah,
He really wanted that answer. So I think that would be great to talk about that at the beginning of the next episode. Yeah, I like the ice cream.
Yeah. I like the ice cream.
Yeah.
It makes you sound like a serial killer. Are you enjoying the ice cream?
Do you like the ice cream? I like the chips.
Yes, I like.
I will have the chips.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. I think that one of the things that I think kind of is like a giveaway sometimes in translation is when, especially if it's coming from the Spanish and potentially from other Romance languages, is instead of using instead of the possessive, my hands, my head, it's always something, you know, the hands did this to her. You know what I mean? And it's like those constructions of the passive, and then it's always like the hands as if they're not part of you.
Yep.
I mean, sometimes they will
love that.
do like tus manos, sus manos. You know, like, oh, here's an example. Like, and this, I mean, everyone probably, this is not like a grand revelation, but might be interesting for people who don't speak or read Spanish. But the idea that, like, I would say, like, my hands are shaking, right? And then in Spanish, we would say, me tiemblan las manos. Like, the hands are shaking to me, you know?
Yeah.
So that is different. Like,
I used to be obsessed with that in terms of like, this goes back to like vaguely made a mistake. Is like, you
right.
don't necessarily break a glass. The glass breaks on you.
Yeah, or you don't lose your keys.
Yeah,
your
the
keys are lost to you. That was one of the things that, like, I loved learning. I mean, I can remember
Me too.
the classroom. I can
Me
remember
too.
like the college classroom at the University of New Hampshire, and like Spanish, you know, 501 or something, and sitting there and being like, I can see it like on the board, like, se me pierden las llaves, and being like, wow, that is so. I always remember the key example.
This changes like the relationship to objects in such a fundamental way, and like we center the self so strongly in English as like, I did this, I am this, I, and like in this reversal, it's suddenly like, oh, it's different. Like I was obsessed with this.
Like the keys were forgotten. Like, it's not my problem. Like,
it's
don't look at me. Don't look at me. They were forgotten to me. Yeah.
Mistakes were made.
Mistakes were made.
I didn't fuck up.
Perfect. Yeah.
Vaguely mistake. I vaguely made a mistake.
I like that she was assailed by, what was it, tedium?
Yeah, assailed by tedium is amazing.
Like, so I took bad notes. Like, hello, I was assaulted by your boringness. What was I gonna do? Dude. Like, so I screwed up a word. Like, next time, don't assail me with your tedium.
I have two last things that we can. Well, first of all, there are way too many gazes in this book. Just gonna put that out there one more time. Chad's like my commitment to not using this word so much.
You need to come up with like a cheat sheet. The translators that translate books for you need to have a cheat sheet, so we know.
This is a hill I'll die on.
I was aiming my gaze.
That's the one. That's the one where I was like, fuck no. Like you're not Voltron. Like, like burning up things.
That's really good.
But two things are related to that in a way.
One, t-shirt that just says
something that nobody else will know.
What is happening? I don't want.
I can't talk about it.
I can't talk about it.
This is one that only you.
I have to go get the kids.
Okay.
I'm gonna sign off. Bye. Have fun. I do have to go. Sorry.
Goodbye. Do you have a final line, Brian? Your favorite line? Aside from I was aiming my gaze, which I have very highlighted in here.
Yes, of course. I imagine it's probably similar, giving the title that you gave the episode. Let me find where that went. You have yours raring to go?
No, because it was going to be the one that I think you're going to steal.
I watched the death machine exterminating the cell machine. From then on, we became mere cells. That was all.
That was mine, but I'm going to go with a different one just to build on the jokes.
Yeah.
But before letting your gaze lapse into a blind spot, you see me, only me, so that I understand the value that is incarnate in that sort of smile. Gaze lapse into a blind spot was one that I was like, I don't think that is actually how that technically works, but just go with it. Just roll.
Circled every gaze just for you. All right, so let's start next week with the, and
Next week we're gonna start with the, which is perfect, and also just so that everyone knows, I'll update if I ever get. Oh, by the way, anyone who's listening, I don't have a computer anymore. It doesn't work, so it's at a Latvian repair shop. It may or may not ever be fixed. I may or may not have an identity after this. It's all good. I'm not worried about it. But when I get it back, I will update the reading schedule. But for next week, we go in Never Did the Fire up to page 90 and in Catching Fire up to page 105. So we'll be back next week with more gazes and thaws and trying to figure shit out on the fly.
I've got my eye on you.
Left eye. Only what is the Illuminati one? You're like,
no sympathy, don't look at me that way, cause physically, well, I'm falling into space, and typically, yeah, I'd wrap it in a bow, but honestly, the cracks, they start to show. I'm pulling down my eyelids 2 at a time, I swear it's just my sinuses, I'll be fine. Only on Monday. Tell me I'm alive.
Hey, Lid. We're gonna go dance.
Okay.